does it have to be that way? We can wave a wand and move beyond the ancient endless cycle that has proved a dismal failure over and over and over.
Hello friends, and welcome to World Citizen Wire. I'm your host, Abel Tomlinson. Our guest today is the renowned peace activist, author, and Nobel Peace Prize nominee, Cindy Sheehan. But first, I want to play a couple interviews with Cindy. This first one is a CNN interview.
The mother of a soldier killed in Iraq is demanding answers from the commander-in-chief. She wants U.S. troops to come home, and she's holding a vigil at President Bush's Texas ranch to make her point. Here's Elaine Quijano.
Her name is Cindy Sheehan, and she is one voice in the emotional debate over the Iraq War.
I'm a mom. My heart was broken on April 4th when my son was killed.
Her son, 24-year-old Army Specialist Casey Sheehan, died in Baghdad's Sadr City last year. She blames President Bush for his death.
George Bush said that the families can rest assured that their children died for a noble cause. And I want to ask him, what is that noble cause?
We're laying the foundation of peace for generations to come. We're defeating the terrorists in a place like Iraq so we don't have to face them here at home.
Recent polls show the public support for the president's Iraq policy is falling below 40%. And while the president says he's determined to finish the job,
we will stay the course, we will complete the job in Iraq.
Cindy Sheehan says she's determined to get answers from him.
Can I go see the president?
No, ma'am, you're going to stop.
Sheehan has met the president before when he stopped at Fort Lewis, Washington to deliver a speech about the Iraq War.
My son had only been dead 2 months. I was in a deep state of shock. Since we met with George Bush in June of 2004, the Downing Street memos have come out. The Duel for Weapons of Mass Destruction or Lack of Weapons of Mass Destruction report came out.
She vows to camp out near the president's Texas ranch for the rest of his vacation until she sees him.
Two top White House officials, the National Security Advisor and the Deputy Chief of Staff, did come out to talk to Sheehan on Saturday, but she isn't satisfied.
And they said they'll pass on the concerns to the president, and I said, fine, I'm not leaving till I talk to him.
The White House says many of the hundreds of families the president has met with know their loved ones died for a noble cause, and that the best way to honor their sacrifice is to complete the mission.
The only way he can honor my son's sacrifice and my family's sacrifice is by bringing the troops home in honor of my son's sacrifice.
Elaine Quijano, CNN, Crawford, Texas.
Cindy Sheehan is the co-founder of a group called Gold Star Families for Peace.
Now that was an interview of Cindy Sheehan during the Bush administration and her protest during the Iraq War during the Iraq War under President Bush. But one thing I really like about her is that she is a nonpartisan advocate for peace. She advocates for peace under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And I want to play a clip of Cindy Sheehan's advocacy for peace under the Obama administration as well. And in this clip, she's being interviewed by one of my favorite journalists, Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez as we go to Washington, D.C., to Cindy Sheehan. Her son, Casey, was killed while serving in Iraq on April 4th, 2004. Cindy Sheehan is the founder of the group Peace of the Action. That's P-E-A-C-E. She has just set up a camp near the Washington Monument called Camp Out Now, calling on President Obama to end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She's joining us from Washington, D.C. Cindy, welcome to Democracy Now! Why have you set up camp in Washington, D.C.?
Well, hi, Amy and Juan. Thank you so much for having me on today. Well, we've set up camp because we believe, of course, that we still believe that the invasions and occupations of Iraq and Afghanistan for the multinational corporations using our U.S. military were wrong under the Bush administration. They're still wrong under the Obama administration. For the last, 13, 14 months, the anti-war movement has been giving President Obama a free pass. And while that's been happening, people are still dying. People are still being displaced. people are still being tortured and detained. And, you know, like the woman from Iraq said, it's to steal the resources and wealth from these countries and put them in the hands of the multinationals. So we've been struggling to keep this movement alive for the past year, and we just said enough is enough, and we need to go into the face of this military-industrial empire again and say, you know, you have to do it on our timeline, the people's timelines. Get our troops out of these countries, let the people control their wealth, control their resources, put them back to work, and maybe we can start to rebuild this country where education's being gutted, healthcare is, you know, an extreme crisis. We don't have jobs, you know, we're losing our homes, and our economy is collapsing also. So we're hoping not just to build a camp, but to rebuild this movement, to have some kind of sane foreign policy.
And Cindy, why do you feel that the peace movement has, as you say, given the Obama administration a pass? What has contributed to sort of this this deconstruction of the movement that was so strong during the Bush administration?
Well, you know, that's a very good question, Juan, and I've been trying to analyze that and figure it out, too. Of course, nobody liked George Bush. Nobody was, you know, in the movement was happy with the Bush administration, happy to see him go. We wanted to see him go in handcuffs instead of on the date when all presidents leave office. But a lot of people in the anti-war movement actually worked for Obama, thinking that he was going to be some kind of a change. So if you work for somebody and that person is elected, then you achieve your goal. And so even though Obama said he was going to send more troops to Afghanistan, Afghanistan has become the new hot war. Iraq has become the new forgotten war. And so as Iraq is winding down for U.S. troops, people are still being killed there. People are still, like the woman said, being economically compromised. But General Stanley McChrystal has said that this is going to be a bloody year for everybody in Afghanistan. And we can't give the Democrats a free pass. Obviously, the Democrats are not the party, are not an anti-war party. And we, the people, have to figure out that it's not, that peace and war are not a bipartisan issue. It's a systemic issue that we have to organize to resist.
Cindy Sheehan, we want to thank you very much for being with us.
Now, I would like to give a proper introduction to Cindy Sheehan. Cindy Sheehan is a heroic American anti-war activist whose son, U.S. Army Specialist Casey Sheehan, was killed during the Iraq War. She attracted national and international media attention in 2005 for her extended anti-war protest at a makeshift camp outside President George W. Bush's Crawford, Texas ranch. She has also been a vocal critic of President Barack Obama's foreign policy as well. In 2008, Sheehan ran for U.S. Congress against Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi in California's 8th District. She ran on a platform of single-payer health care, media reform, overturning all the free trade agreements, repealing the Patriot Act, renewable energy, nationalizing oil and electricity, ending the war on drugs, legalizing cannabis, peace in the Middle East, ending torture, closing Guantanamo Bay, and other issues. In a 7-way race, she came in second place. She also ran for vice president with the Peace and Freedom Party in 2012, and she also ran for governor of California with the Peace and Freedom Party in 2014. And she was also a founding member of the Gold Star Families for Peace, an organization she created in 2005 with other families of soldiers killed in U.S. wars. This organization sought not only to end the Iraq War, but also to provide support for families of soldiers killed in Iraq and other wars. Sheehan also gained the label of Peace Mom from the mainstream media, and in 2009 she was arrested with 60 others at the White House protesting President Obama's continuation of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She also protested on the streets of Oslo, Norway, as President Barack Obama accepted the Nobel Peace Prize. She now hosts, she has been hosting for years now, a weekly radio show called Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox. And she has interviewed many notable activists and world leaders, including Howard Zinn, Ray McGovern, Ann Wright, and others. She is also the author of several books, including The Obama Files, Chronicles of an Award-Winning War Criminal, and also Revolution, A Love Story, as well as A Better World is Possible, and Dear President Bush, and Peace Mom, A Mother's Journey Through Heartache to Activism, among other books. She was also nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Okay, I'm very pleased and honored to introduce peace activist Cindy Sheehan. And Cindy, welcome to World Citizen Wire. And if you will, could you summarize your story for us, particularly from Iraq forward? I ask this because I see similar parallels within my own personal evolution. The war kind of shaped me. In 2001, I was apolitical. But then in the run-up to the Iraq War, I could see that our leaders were lying to us, and then I became very political. So how would you describe the evolution of your views since that time? It seems that they've kind of changed over time, have they not?
I've always been against war, and I've always been, I would consider liberal, Democrat for my entire voting life until my son was killed in Iraq in 2004. And then I started to do more research on U.S. foreign policy, particularly the lies that got the U.S. into the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2006, after I was at Camp Casey in Crawford, Texas, for the month of August protesting George Bush, the Democrats met with me in Washington, D.C., people like Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, Barack Obama, all these leading Democrats, and they all promised me if I helped them get back the House of Representatives in 2006, that they would help me end the wars. And so we know that in 2007, the Democrats did get the majority in the House of Representatives. Nancy Pelosi became the Speaker of the House, and the first thing they did was approve more war funding for the war. So I felt personally betrayed, and I felt like, the entire anti-war movement was used to really piggyback on what had become a very large anti-war sentiment in the United States by then to get in power, and then they betrayed us. So in 2007, I left the Democratic Party. In 2008, I ran against Nancy Pelosi as an independent. In 2009, I joined the Peace and Freedom Party, and it's a socialist, it's a ballot recognized party in California, and I've run on their ballot line for a couple things. But the biggest evolution I've had since my son was killed was recognizing that war, empire, Wall Street, when it comes to these issues, which I consider like the root issues,
the core issues.
Yeah, exactly. The Democrats and Republicans are almost exactly the same. It's only when you get to social things like gay marriage and things like that, do they differ? And I'm talking about elected Democrats and Republicans.
Especially
believe it or not, I have friends who are Democrat and who are Republican, but it's the elected ones who I think, they care about their power, they care about making their wealthy donors wealthier, and they don't care about us.
Right. And I think, especially as you move up in the power within the Democratic Party, I thought what was interesting was that, the Iraq War vote, actually a majority of Democrats voted against the Iraq War, but it was actually the minority of Democrats that voted for the war that rose to the highest rank, the highest levels of power. I mean, it was Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton were some of the biggest leaders pushing the Iraq War. John Kerry, who ran for president, all these people were the leaders in the Democratic Party for war. And we forget that there were some Democrats that actually opposed the war, Dennis Kucinich and others. I just think that's...
But we also have to remember that even though there were some that voted against the authorization to use military force in Iraq, they had already voted for the authorization to use military force against Afghanistan, which every president since then has used to not going to Congress for further military action throughout the Middle East.
So that's what all the drone wars...
The only person to vote against that was Barbara
Lee.
Right. And everybody else voted in favor of that. So really, at that point, when Bush was getting ready to invade Iraq, he didn't really think he needed congressional approval for that.
It seems like those kinds of that kind of undermine the whole body of international law that the United States questionably respected, but and is that given the justification for all the drone bombings we see across the Middle East? I mean, to where they can just...
Well, yeah, I think that's what Barack Obama was using for his justification for continuing the Bush era wars in the Middle East, and in fact expanding them. They flaunted international law many times, and now the United States, after the Obama era, is in at least 7 or 8 active military campaigns in the Middle East and Africa. And so the United States really thinks it's exceptional. It doesn't. And then Trump, he just had his national security strategy speech yesterday, and it seems like America first,
Right.
first and only,
Right.
and we're going to do whatever we have to do. When I say we, I don't really include myself in the imperial government. The United States is going to do whatever it has to do to protect its prosperity. And that was one of the things that the national security strategy said was important: protecting U.S. prosperity, strength through peace. It really wasn't a departure from any other president, except, Obama put the environment as a potential threat to national security, and Trump took it off. So
Right.
It really is just a continuing program. It doesn't matter who's president.
Well, and when you say that there's not much difference on the fundamental issues, in addition to the war and the Wall Street policies, I would, certainly tie big oil and these other big corporations in there. But I think what was really telling within the Obama administration in terms of environment and big oil was he gave a speech in Cushing, Oklahoma, where he bragged about laying record amounts of pipeline and opening up offshore drilling, and he said he laid down enough pipeline to encircle the earth and then some. And so, I mean, to me, when we hear about Obama and the Paris agreements and things like that, it seems kind of somewhat superficial to me.
Right. I think that, Obama, like you said, he laid or approved a lot of pipelines. He approved a lot of offshore oil drilling leases. Right. He also, put $1 trillion into the budget to modernize our nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
He was not. But like I said, these Democrats give lip service to progressive issues, and then they're busy. The difference between a Democrat and a Republican, I often say, is a Democrat will stab you in the front. No, I'm sorry, a Republican will stab you in the front and a Democrat will stab you in the back.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So the Republicans don't even pretend like they're environmentalists or feminists, or peaceniks, but sometimes the Democrats do.
Right.
And of course, it's only for votes and for power.
So in some way, it's almost like the Republicans, even though they're horrible, they're slightly more honest in some sense.
Well, yeah, and they're appealing to their base, and honestly, that's the way their base is, which is, to me, sad. But the Democrats appeal to their base by being snakes in the grass.
Right. Well, in your book here, the Obama Files, Chronicles of an Award-Winning War Criminal. I really like that title, and you mentioned the nuclear arsenal upgrade. That was one of the things that bothered me the most about that administration, is that, you know, that was a massive violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT.
Right.
And what other things would you point to that kind of you know, emphasize this idea of Obama being a war criminal? I mean, certainly the drone bombings, things like that.
Well, you know, he, like I said, he expanded the Bush era war of terror against the world. I think one of the most egregious things that the Obama administration did was the attack and destruction of Libya. And
that's the war that Hillary kind of spearheaded, right?
Right. I mean, she was a cheerleader for it, and just like she was a Democrat cover for the war in Iraq. You know, she went on the talk shows and basically was just, you know, the Democrat Condoleezza Rice talking about mushroom clouds and things like that. But you know, and then after the murder of Gaddafi, Hillary Clinton says, we saw, he's dead. And then she laughed about it. To me,
it seemed kind of psychopathic to me to laugh about anyone dying, whether it's, you know, anybody.
Down my spine. When I've never been a fan of hers. Well, it's been a long time since I've been a fan of hers, but that really sent chills on my spine. But you know, the destruction of Libya, the expansion of the drone program. Obama expanded that by 500 times over the Bush era. And at the end of his administration, he actually bragged about being the only president that was at war for all 8 years of his presidency, which isn't even true. You know, the United States has, you know, since it's been a country, there's only a couple dozen years where the U.S. hasn't been at war. And, you know, that counts covertly and overtly at war. I mean, it's a warlike empire. And
especially since the, you know, the establishment of standing army after World War II, you know, it seems like with that standing army, it almost is, it's kind of a Siamese twin with endless war. You know, you have this massive military, you got to use it. I don't know.
Well, you know, absolutely. And then there's, you know, so many things. Obama had a kill list. You know, there was the Terror Tuesdays when he signed off on extrajudicially murdering Americans. And I think the biggest horrendous example of that was when he murdered the son of Anwar al-Awlaki and some of his friends who they were having lunch or something. Just like,
well, was that
terrible.
Was that in Yemen?
Yes. Yeah, just terrible. And the response, I don't remember if it was Obama or Biden that said something like, well, you just don't be the son of a terrorist or something like that. And so my point with Obama was that, you know, it's not so much about Obama. I got over the fact that, I mean, when my son was first killed, I was just enraged at George Bush.
Yeah, I was too.
Enraged. And it's really, they're really just figureheads. They're the war machine. The military-industrial complex has momentum. It has institutional momentum. And I think even if a president wanted to stop it, a president couldn't. That's why we need a mass movement of workers, you know, of people, of just regular people around the country joining with, you know, in solidarity with the people that the United States is bombing or occupying, to say enough is enough. It has to stop.
That's why it seems to me that it's really a systemic problem, and if we just focus on puppet A or puppet B of the war machine, then we kind of lose track. And if we're partisan, you know, and we really need that nonpartisan kind of peace movement, or, you know, economic change movement. And If we get stuck on just Trump and, oh, if we get lucky and we can impeach Trump, everything's going to be great. No, right? There's much bigger systemic problems that are far deeper than just Trump, I think.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we have to impeach the entire empire if we want any, and I think we could change entire Congress could go and we can get a new Congress. And I don't think anything would change for the positive. And so we just have to recognize that the United States, it's like trying to cure a body riddled with cancer by taking a vitamin C pill. There's some deep, deep cleansing and healing and rebuilding that needs to be done. And it's so insidious, the war machine. People say, we could use nonviolent things like boycott. So how do we boycott Boeing or Raytheon or whatever, the World Bank, or we just need organized things to shut the system down that would really hurt it, that would really put a dent, that would show that we have that we're serious and that the people have power. But it's just something that, as long as we keep our political leanings partisan, as long as half of us are rooting for the Democrats, half of us are rooting for the Republicans, and whatever, like you said, puppet A or puppet B gets in, and nothing changes for the people, then then we're not actually going to be effective. But that's what they want. That's what the establishment wants us to think. Every 2 or 4 years, you go and vote, and that's all we have to do. And then the establishment wants us to think that. So I think a majority of Americans do think that. Well, that all they have to do is go vote.
Right. Well, even then, I mean, only about a quarter of the public voted for Hillary and a quarter voted for Trump. I mean, half the people aren't voting, and sometimes I wonder if some of those people are, they kind of understand something,
Right. Well, from the time I was really little, I remember my mom, she'd go and vote and she'd come home and she'd say, well, I just voted for the lesser of two evils.
Right.
And so, as a young child, I always thought that was strange. But I think we can't discount. We can't just say people who don't vote are apathetic, because I know a lot of people who, that is a deeply held belief for them, that if you vote, you're just encouraging the system. And if you go and vote, then you're just first you're giving your stamp of approval. It doesn't matter if you voted for Trump or whatever. You're saying that that I think the system works. And and so, but even though I do vote and I have run for office, I do it with my eyes wide open, and I always go, and I never vote for a Democrat or Republican. I vote for a protest candidate. And so, but I understand the people who have a principled belief that voting is part of the problem. But then you have to educate people, because then, the establishment will come out and say, oh, look at, people are so apathetic. Well, you're not giving us any choices.
Well, yeah, and a big part of it, I think, is democracy doesn't work unless it's informed democracy, and just the public in general is, a lot of us are way underinformed, and a big part of it's the media monopoly that's happened, and it kind of restricts what people even can understand, so they can't be fully informed voters. So democracy is not functioning.
Well, they're underinformed, but they're also ill-informed. And I don't spend a lot of time watching or listening to corporate media, but every once in a while I check in with them to see what the what the propaganda is. But to me, it's just for example, it's recognized. It's just a part of, it's just true that Russia hacked the elections in 2016. It's not even questioned anymore. It's just a truth. It's just like it's just black and white. and people just say it like it happened, and there's no question about it. And so when people start hearing that over and over again, and you get somebody on that's just, somebody like Rachel Maddow or Wolf Blitzer or somebody from Fox News, and they say Russia hacked our elections, people think that, and they don't go in and investigate it. They don't do their own research.
Well, they don't promote, the corporate media doesn't promote people that have the really intelligent, critical opinion of that. I mean, people like Robert Perry or somebody like that, or people from The Intercept. Some of these people have questioned some of the Russia narrative.
Or me.
Right, or you. Yeah, of course.
I used to be on the media all the time.
Right.
Of course I was exploited because, they thought that I could be used as a tool for the Democratic Party. But once I left the Democratic Party and started to have a critique of both sides, they shut me down.
Right. Yeah, there's certain people they don't let on. I mean, you never see Noam Chomsky on mainstream media or somebody like that.
Right. And, because we're actually asking people to be critical thinkers, and we're giving a side of the story that is completely opposite to what the corporate media and the government is saying. And they don't want those voices on because they don't want to be exposed for what they are. And, I was just talking to somebody today. I watched a great documentary on Netflix. Can I say it?
Yeah.
Okay, it's called Wormwood. And
okay.
Did you watch it?
Well, I saw it, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It's about the CIA, but I'm not going to give any spoilers, but this is my axiom. If the CIA or the NSA or CNN, I like to call it CIANN, or MSNBCIA, if they say anything, I immediately believe the opposite of what they say. And sometimes, sometimes that doesn't work for me, but I do my research, and I find credible sources. I've been doing this for a long time, so I recognize credible sources, and I do my own research and find out what the truth is. Sometimes they don't outright lie. Most of the time they sugarcoat it, or they put BS all over it, and so you have to dig deep to find what the truth is.
What I've seen with mainstream media, it's almost less the direct lying, which does happen, but it's more the sin of omission. And certainly you can see that with the issue of Israel and Palestine. I mean, there's a documentary, Peace Propaganda in the Promised Land, that really dissects the American media coverage of Israel and Palestine and how they really omit a lot of information and context, and really kind of give this skewed perspective of what's going on there.
Well, and then the best lies contain a little bit of the truth. So I just don't think the American people know what to believe anymore. And the establishment has created a situation where most of us are just struggling to survive, to keep a roof over our heads, right? And food on the table. And when we have such a struggle like that, it just is really hard to seek out. Maybe I only have 10 minutes to get news.
Yeah.
So I don't have the time or the inclination or the energy to seek out the truth.
Yeah, a lot of people, work full time. They get home, they're tired, and they just want to have a beer or watch TV or something to relax, because they're kind of overworked sometimes, and they may not have time to do a lot of research or get out in the streets and try to foment revolution.
I think that's our biggest problem is, capitalism has set up this situation where, we're just struggling to survive, and now we have this new tax bill that's going to be another immense transfer of wealth from the poor to the already rich, and people just have to realize that it's not our fault. It's not like if hard workers if hard work was rewarded with success, then we'd all be millionaires because we're all working our butts off.
Right.
So we just need to recognize that it's only through solidarity and recognizing the problem. And like you said earlier, the core issues and working to overcome that, are we going to have a better life?
Another core issue, is recently they passed a massive $700 billion, they call it a defense budget, I call it a war budget. I mean, it should be called a war budget. And, what was interesting is, they say there's these big differences between the Democrats and Republicans. And I say there is some more interesting difference within the Democratic Party, but in general they are pretty alike on the core issues. But what was interesting is that Congress passed this $700 billion budget that was actually more than what Trump requested. It included more weapons than was requested. Trump had requested a certain number of these really expensive war machines, the F-35 and these warships and things like that. And Democrats, a majority of Democrats voted for this war budget. And
it was 88-2 in the Senate.
It was what?
It was 98-2 in the Senate.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, there was just a couple Democrats.
So,
2 Democrats voted against it, I think. Is that right, or 4?
I don't. I think Bernie Sanders didn't vote.
Right. I want to say 2 or 4 voted against it.
I'm not sure. I might be thinking of another.
Right.
It was 88-2, and 10 people didn't vote. Anyway,
in the House,
so many numbers running around in my head.
Right. In the House, I think it was 70 total congressmen voted against it, and 63 of them were Democrats. So a majority of Democrats in the House did vote for this. And what that was so amazing to me is that the Democrats pretend like they're all anti-Trump, Trump resists that, but then a majority of Democrats vote for a war budget even bigger than Trump is asking for, and it included the F-35 warplane, that $1.5 trillion warplane that doesn't work half the time, and some military leaders.
Is that the one that they have? Is it the F-35 that has a plant in Vermont?
Yeah, I don't know if it was a plant, but I think they were going to put a base there.
Well, Bernie Sanders has always been a big proponent of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's a terrible plane.
Right.
And it's very expensive, and it's a boondoggle, but it's a boon for the war machine.
Right. I just think that was so disgusting, And the thing is that the Democrats not just opposing Trump, but it's the fact that Trump has threatened, nuclear holocaust with fire and fury. I mean, he's a danger to every human on the planet because of that. I don't care about the whole Russia scandal. The fact that he's threatened nuclear war. And it's not, you attack North Korea and bomb them with nuclear weapons, they're going to, kill millions of South Koreans and Japanese, and that'll disrupt the whole region. It could draw China and Russia into it. I mean, it's extremely dangerous. And
it would be disastrous, but even Obama wouldn't rule out the use of nuclear weapons during his presidency. And we have to take that seriously because the United States is the only country that ever dropped nuclear bombs on children. So, that's something that we always have to take very seriously until, there's disarmament across the board. I grew up during the Cold War. I grew up dreaming of mushroom clouds, literally. So it's something that is always there, and it just takes one.
Right.
It just takes one, and the whole world could be destroyed. I have kids and grandkids, and that's not acceptable to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matter of self-defense to oppose anybody that's threatening nuclear war. I mean,
my 8-year-old granddaughter the other day told me, my grandkids call me Gigi. She's like, Gigi would twump. She has a little bit of a she has a little bit of a speech impediment. Would Trump really drop a nuclear bomb? And I just said, honey, we just really have to hope that he cares as much about his kids and grandkids as I do.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope that that's not going to happen. And she knows what I do. All my grandkids know I'm a peace activist and I'm against all these things. And I got arrested when they were little protesting at Vandenberg Air Force Base. They're very aware of it, and they're, but it's just really sad that our my grandchildren still have to worry about that in 2017.
Right, and I think a lot of people may not realize how Obama and Bush also, threatened nuclear attack too. They just weren't as explicit as Trump. They, whenever, I think people need to realize when presidents say all options are on the table, like Obama and Trump and Bush,
Right.
Bush all said, that is kind of an implicit threat of nuclear attack.
That's all. That's the options, and Trump, as my
Twump.
granddaughter.
Yeah, I prefer that.
Yeah, me too. Trump is just the one good thing about him. I think he's just making. Obama was a smooth talker,
Right.
and Trump is just making everything so obvious,
Right.
and I think I think it's good in essence, and I think Bush was probably just at. Bush is lucky that there really wasn't Twitter when he was president, but I think Bush was just as out of his league as Trump is. But Bush had his father. His father, decades-long deep state player in the establishment, evil person. He had Cheney, same thing.
Rumsfeld, yeah.
And so they were experienced imperialists. And so there was a correction. When Bush would say something stupid, there was this correction. But Trump doesn't have that. And, Trump is just like, he's a loose cannon.
Right.
And so I'm just hoping that even you see even Republicans distancing themselves from him.
Right.
So, hopefully it'll make people wake up. But like you said, all we got to do is impeach him. All we got to do is get him out. What do they think? That if Trump's impeached, that Clinton's going to be president?
Right. Well, yeah, and Pence would be more of a smooth talker and, more effective and articulate and could more effectively pass a bunch of destructive things. I mean,
and Hillary Clinton is also a very experienced imperialist, and she would be maybe even doing worse things than Trump, but with more finesse.
Right, and that's the thing, is we had Bush and Trump, and we have somewhat of these resistance movements of various sorts rising up, but with, these smooth talkers and the Democrats that, that they are these professional salesmen almost with a good smile and pretty face and can kind of more effectively sell things. You see the same thing with Justin Trudeau in Canada. He's got a good smile and he's charismatic and he supports gay marriage, but then on the other hand, he supports these massive environmental destruction of the tar sands, and it's the same thing with Obama. Is he's got this nice smile and charisma, but nobody pays attention to the deeper military Wall Street oil policies. I mean,
well, if we go back to the Bill Clinton administration, it was a nightmare. And a lot of things that happened during his administration were having blowback still from his administration.
Absolutely.
And, if Trump is, such a horrible sexual harasser, whatever, Bill Clinton was a sexual assaulter.
Right. And then, and then NAFTA, I mean, without NAFTA and all the, the destruction of the Mexican economy from that, and that caused all the undocumented immigration. If it hadn't been for that's a huge part of Trump's, voting support, is being able to demonize undocumented immigrants that are
the overturning of Glass-Steagall.
Exactly.
Led to the collapse in 2008. And bailing out of Wall Street and millions of people losing their homes and their security, their safety nets. But also Bill Clinton probably killed more Iraqi during his administration than Bush did.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
From the sanctions. Yeah.
Sanctions and active bombing campaigns.
Right.
So, maybe 2 million Iraqi were killed during that.
Yeah, I think famously Secretary of State Albright of Clinton said, the 500,000 children, that died. It was worth it.
Disgusting. So it's just, I'm very nonpartisan.
Me too.
obviously, but it's very important to talk about these contradictions.
Mm-hmm.
These contradictions that, if like my show is a left-wing show, so we focus mostly on the contradictions of the Democrats,
Mm-hmm.
to just highlight the hypocrisy of the system.
Right.
And so I think that that's the only reason I talk about these people.
Yeah.
To say, look, how come you went out and protested Trump when he talked about building a wall, but you didn't protest Obama, who deported more people than every president,
Right.
more immigrant worker than every president before him combined.
And if we could come back to Clinton, I'd say one more thing I'd like to highlight about his administration that was destructive, besides the mass incarceration, but was the Telecom Act of 1996 that allowed media to consolidate down into 5 or 6 massive corporations. And if it hadn't been for that, we could have a more informed electorate, and we probably wouldn't have Trump. So
that's another great documentary on Netflix. Support Netflix, but the 13th.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Oh, that is so good, and it
good.
really. I'm so glad that it really calls out Clinton for expanding mass incarceration.
Right, and I think that it's an interesting subject, Netflix itself, because if someone is somewhat knowledgeable, they can find extremely good information on the internet. But for the average American that just turns on the TV or may have Netflix and doesn't necessarily know where to go find good information on the internet, there are some really good documentaries on Netflix that I'm really happy about it. I mean, it's almost revolutionary to some extent.
Well, they put things that question 9/11.
Right.
I've seen things that question vaccinations.
All kinds of
things.
And
it's just, even though we might not agree with everything, at least they're bringing up a conversation, and they're putting a different perspective on things.
One of the best ones they had on there was Oliver Stone's. It's historically been fact checked. His series on Empire that was the Untold History, I think, of the United States.
Yeah.
I was surprised that was on there, and my point was that I'm kind of a little concerned with this net neutrality thing that could lead to some kind of a harmful effect on Netflix. I hope not.
Well, right. I mean, I've seen alarmist things, but I've also seen that this thing with the FCC was just people in power trying to say who would control the bandwidth or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that, there's somewhere in between the alarmist and the truth.
Right. Well, and we do see some of the states fighting back against those moves. And also there are some municipalities that have just created more of the socialist kind of internets, or, local governments have created municipal public utility internet services. In Chattanooga, for instance, in Tennessee, has now one of the fastest internet services in the nation, and I think it's half the cost of corporate, internet.
Right.
So.
Ooh.
Then that undermines the whole net neutrality thing. If you can create public internet, utility, then there is no corporate control and throttling and all that.
Right. Well, I mean, this could be a whole other subject for another show.
Right. I'm sorry if we're getting distracted.
Control.
We are running out of time. I'd like to just hit on a couple more points. One of them is, in highlighting these hypocrisies of the Democratic Party, and one is in terms of the Libyan disaster. We talked about Libya, but in terms of Yemen, there's this massive crisis where, Obama and Trump administrations have, supported the Saudi coalition there and created mass suffering. Millions of people are facing starvation and disease, and this comes also with Hillary, Obama, and Trump selling these record arms deals to the Saudis. Breaking records, selling bombs and warplanes to this one of the most brutal dictatorships on the planet. And to me, that's indefensible. And I just wonder if you had any more thoughts about what's happening in Yemen there and those contradictions.
Well, definitely, it's interesting to me that the United States and Israel, I call United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia the true axis of evil.
Right.
And how, like you said, the hypocrisy of saying that Russia is not as welcoming to gays as it should be, when the United States is best buddies with, like you said, this brutal, repressive Saudi regime,
Right.
and that has it's like a proxy. The United States has done some active bombing in Yemen, especially with drones, but it's like a proxy destruction of Yemen using Saudi Arabia, and there's a massive humanitarian crisis there, and it was in reaction to a government that was going to be more responsive to the citizens and less responsive to right-wing Islam and and things like that. So yeah, Saudi Arabia is a terrible thing, but terrible things flock together.
Right.
So is the United States.
Well, and another hypocrisy tied in with that is just a lot of people on the supposed left in the United States, believe that Obama and Hillary were these great champions of gay rights and feminism and all this, but then they're sold these record arms deals to the Saudis and have this tight relationship with them, and they're the worst country, one of the worst countries in the world for executing gays, and one of the most repressive to women in the world.
Well, and then another hypocrisy is they're trying to really hard working with extremists in Syria to overthrow the Assad administration, which actually was more open to women, and it was more liberal.
Right.
And so now
we saw the same.
They're trying to overthrow that regime, but they're supporting the Saudi regime. And anywhere the United States goes, of course, causes a reaction in the other direction. And so it causes more extremism. It causes more so-called terrorism, causes more brutal repression. And so Syria has really been able to stand against that. I'm sure Assad doesn't want to end up like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi.
Right, and Gaddafi, well, it wasn't. Libya was one of the more. It had a better social system than most of Africa. Its economy was one of the better.
It had very good, and Gaddafi was starting to recognize that Libya was a part of Africa and was starting to foster Pan-Africanism and with less racism, because apparently the Muslims in Libya were racist against the Africans, and that was their actual home. So there was more acceptance. There were good things happening socially in Libya, and just can't have that. Just the United States doesn't like the threat of a good example.
Right, and I was just gonna. I can't believe you said that. I was just gonna bring that up. We're running out of time, but I did remember that from your book, Revolution: A Love Story. Revolution: A Love Story. You said the United States doesn't want the threat of a good example, and I think I was wondering what you thought, not just about Venezuela, but then we say we're fighting for freedom and democracy, but we've overthrown, that lie is exposed that we've overthrown multiple democracies. We've overthrown Allende in Chile, and Mossadegh in Iran, and Arbenz in Guatemala.
Right.
So I don't know what you thought about, if you could say
Well,
any more.
they're still actively trying to undermine, the United States is still actively trying to undermine the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. The United States tried to assassinate Fidel Castro hundreds of times, and it was not successful. And it's just, the height of hypocrisy to claim that the United States military is going somewhere to spread freedom and democracy when, like you said, it actually actively works to undermine freedom and democracy all over the world.
Right. Well, I think we're about out of time. I just want to say thank you very much for your time and for this discussion, and thank you for all your work and your peace activism. I'm really inspired by it, as I know a lot of people are. And well, I guess one last thing I want to say is I saw in the back of your book about Obama, you mentioned Jacob George. And he's actually a beloved local hero here in Northwest Arkansas. And I just wanted to, he's an Afghanistan veteran who actually sadly took his own life because of his experience there. And I just wanted to know how you knew about him and how you came to know him.
Well, I think just through our mutual work, and in 2013, I rode my bike across the country in something that we called Tour de Peace.
Okay, yeah, I read about that.
We met up with Jacob in Oklahoma City, I think, and we did some work with him there, and just Jacob was just so courageous and outspoken against the empire, and it was a huge loss when he committed suicide. But we have 25 veterans a day commit suicide in the United States. I mean, it's a holocaust of veterans, and more veterans since Vietnam have committed suicide than actually died in Vietnam. So it's this huge problem, and I'm glad to talk about Jacob and veterans like him who, they're and like me, seeking to expose the lies, because we know we can't bring Jacob back, and Jacob couldn't, take back his experiences in the war. I can't bring Casey back, but what we can try to do is help others from becoming victims.
Prevent it, the future recurrence, yeah. Well, I would say thank you again, Cindy, and thank you for all your peace activism, and thank you for your time.
You mentioned Cindy Sheehan Soapbox?
Yes, I did. Yes, and everyone, I urge you to check out Cindy Sheehan's Soapbox podcast. Is it radio broadcast as well, or?
Yes, it is on some radio stations around the country.
And please pick up one of her books, buy one of her books, and help support her work, her activism. And I think you can subscribe to her newsletter as well. Is there anything else you want me to tell people?
Well, that's it. But thank you for having me on, and thank you for your flexibility.
Okay, no, thank you so much. We also want to thank our viewers. Please join us next time on World Citizen Wire, and may peace prevail.
But it doesn't have to be that way. We can wave a wand and move beyond the ancient endless cycle that has proved a dismal failure.